If you couldn't already tell, I've been on a bit of a plug-and-play kick in recent years. To me, the market that formed around these things in the late 90s and early 2000s is one of the most fascinating footnotes of video game history. And I'm not talking about those official ones that ran on unique hardware. Those have a certain place in my heart, but there isn't really much there to keep me interested. I'm talking about Famiclone plug-and-plays. You know, the ones that look like this. Or this. Or this. Or this. Or this. While a lot of these are packed with dozens of pirated games, there are countless games that were either developed or heavily modified specifically for distribution on these units. They aren't great games. While there are certainly interesting titles that were featured on devices like this, the vast majority range from not interesting to downright terrible. To put it charitably, the majority of the games on these things are what I would consider padding. These games exist purely to pump up the number of titles featured on the menu, and you'll often be hard-pressed to squeeze any enjoyment out of them. It's hard to believe that an actual human even worked on these games sometimes. However, I believe that simply focusing on the notable titles featured on these consoles really doesn't capture the plug-and-play experience in the slightest. Most of the fun comes from booting up a console, scrolling through the tens or hundreds of games, and seeing what absurdity lies within. However, with so many games being released across so many different regions, and with them being as old as they are, it can become kind of expensive to collect these things that, in all honesty, I'm never gonna get my money's worth out of. And that's why I love Project Plug and Play. If you aren't familiar with it, this is an archive that's currently maintained by New Rising Sun, and it consists of extracts from plug-and-plays and handheld Famiclone systems whose ROMs have been dumped. So basically, the techno wizards who know how to dump these things will extract the entire ROM data, menu and all, and then the individual games are separated from the set and categorized in the archive. And with so many devices out there featuring unique games and variants, there is so much to find within this archive. It's like the experience I described with actual plug-and-plays, but seemingly infinite. You could spend ages looking through this thing, and it'll send you down countless rabbit holes if you're anything like me. If you want proof, look no further than my last two videos, which are the result of rabbit holes that started by me browsing through this thing. And as someone who finds this stuff so fascinating, I've been wondering how I could make a video that accurately captures the plug-and-play experience for years now. This is something that I used to do way back in the day, but it involved covering every game included on whatever set I chose to make a video about, and this quickly got dull and repetitive. I could easily curate a list of titles that I find interesting, but as I've already mentioned, I don't think that accurately captures the spirit of plug-and-plays or Project Plug-and-Play. The mundane games are just as important to the experience as the gems, and recently, inspired by the rapidly approaching holiday season, I finally came up with an idea. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that means that you missed it. But it's all here, so don't feel too bad. For the past 25 days of December, I've released a YouTube short every day that focuses on one randomly selected game from Project Plug and Play. And by random, I don't mean that I aimlessly clicked around to find something interesting. No, I left it fully up to RNG. I put together a set of bash commands that would randomly select 25 games from the archive, and I challenged myself to come up with something for every single game that it picked, regardless of how mundane it was. There were only 3 rules that would constitute swapping out a game, and only one of the games violated one, so this is basically as random of an experience as you can get. So I promise you, if it sounds like I was struggling to come up with material for a game, it's because I absolutely was. However, my saving grace was that I self-imposed a 1-minute limit on these shorts. This was actually a technical limitation when I came up with this idea, but YouTube upped the shorts limit to 3 minutes a couple weeks after that, so this was basically for my own sanity by the time I got around to making the videos. And with all of that out of the way, I present to you my advent calendar of plug and play and handheld Famiclone padding. Or as I like to call it, the... Oh, we're off to a great start here. I love this guy. This is Box's World, a hack of nice code software Snowball, which itself is a clone of Sokoban. You know, the game where you push boxes around. It's Box's World, it's not that complicated. I guess there isn't really much to say about a Sokoban clone, as there isn't really much room to mess it up, but they sure found a way. You move around with the D-pad and undo steps with A, but B opens the pause menu. And the pause menu highlights the exit button by default, which doesn't exit the menu, but the entire game. So I accidentally exited the game multiple times while trying to close the menu. That should be the very last option on the menu. Actually, no, this menu shouldn't open with B. There's another button on the controller that makes a lot more sense here. At least there's a level select here, so I can Box's World to my heart's content. I'm also not really good at this type of game and get frustrated easily, so my heart's content is quite limited. Alright then, we're getting straight into it, I guess. Owl Glider Adventure is a reskin of Little Plane by Jungle Tack. All you do is tilt this plane left and right and avoid these big lightning barriers, which are really spaced out and not all that difficult to avoid. I can't really see this being someone's favorite game on its source handheld. Power-ups start showing up once you get far enough in, but I can't tell exactly how these are supposed to be useful. You eventually start to encounter small obstacles, but they look like they'd be power-ups, so I ended up dying by purposely running straight into one. They look a lot more like actual obstacles in the original version, and this is a pretty common issue with these branded reskins. Oh yeah, this is a licensed PJ Masks game. Could you tell? It's been 2 years, and I still don't know what the hell a PJ Masks is, and I don't plan on ever finding out. Alright, we've got the first of our inventor hacks. This is Rouge Brothers, a sprite hack of the original Mario Brothers. It unfortunately doesn't replace the brothers with Rouge the Bat, but rather with plumbers that have had most of their distinctive features stripped away. It's like the Playmobil version of Mario. This hack job is so haphazardly done that they didn't even bother to change some of the sprites, so this enigma of a brother transforms into Mario when skidding on the floor. It also replaces the shell creepers with these creepy cat, duck... What is that? The rest of the enemies don't seem to have been changed though. It's a surface deep hack, as is the case with most of these. I'll be honest, I got to the stages with the fighter flies and stopped there because I'm not really inclined to play the NES version of Mario Bros. In single player for very long. You might be more familiar with Rouge Brer, the earlier iteration of this hack from before inventors started correcting some of their nonsensical titles. They did the same with Conta Enegi, and somehow the corrected versions always end up feeling more cursed than the original ones. Goals is a soccer game in which you have to hit the ball into one of 3 holes. You position the cursor to determine the angle of your kick, and hold the A button to determine its strength. The first few levels have a hole directly in the center, so there's no reason to aim for the other holes in the goal. Once you find the correct position and power, you could just keep moving downward and charging up to the same spots and cheese the game. 6 goals and you move on to the next level. However, once you get to level 5, it has the sense to remove the center hole, so you have to start aiming for the sides instead. Coincidentally, level 6 is where I stopped playing. Not a skill issue at all, nope. I love the aesthetic of these CubeTech VT369 releases. It genuinely feels like something out of an absurdist post when that stock horn sound effect starts playing after completing a level. Oh, it's a Paw Patrol game. This is Farm Rescue, a reskin of Jungle Tak's Firefight Bros. In this game, you have to bounce barn animals across the screen to save them from the burning barn. I think I liked Jungle Tak's previous attempt on this concept better, with that one clone of Flying Hero where they launched the firefighter directly up at the building. From looking at the original version of this game, surprise surprise, this is a clone of Fire from Game & Watch Gallery 4 on the GBA. They Rouge Brerified the brothers, but those are obviously Mario and Luigi. I'm not quite sure where the other Mario sprites are grabbed from though. They actually copied the hectic nature of the Game & Watch game pretty well, as most of the difficulty comes from people jumping out of the window before you've gotten the chance to bring the previous ones to safety. It doesn't get quite as frantic as the original though. I think Game & Watch games are actually pretty solid games to copy for shovelware collections. Bugfight is a hack of Millipede that CubeTech VT369'd all over. It has everything that you'd want from an awful VT369 hack. The ugly pillow shading, the ill-fitting and ridiculous selection of music that starts playing whenever something happens in game. It has it all. As is the case with most of these VT369 hacks, the game still plays perfectly fine. It's still Millipede, and if you mute the game you might even be able to have a good time with it. But this presentation is just insane. I struggle to see how someone could butcher a game like this and genuinely believe that anyone would want to play it. It almost feels like some sort of joke, like they knew that this was funny. I can't imagine that they took it seriously. There's a VT03 version whose graphics have been candy-coated, but it's otherwise much more faithful to the original. With these hacks and the American NES release of Millipede defacing the game, the brilliant Famicom version of the game just can't catch a break. 2D Escape is a strategy game in which you play as a ship being pursued by missiles. For each turn, you can move your ship in one of 8 directions, and the goal is to both evade the missiles and ensure that they've all blown themselves up before moving on to the next level. If you plan your path well enough, you can use these wormholes in the corner of the board, which I expected to teleport me to another wormhole, but appeared to just teleport you to a random place on the board. I actually kinda dig this one. This seems like the type of mobile game that I would have idly tapped away at under my desk in high school if I didn't have anything better to do. I think this game is a bit less pleasant if you play the unmodified dump. For the music seems to be corrupted to high hell. I can't strategize under these conditions. Thankfully the RNG was generous and gave me the version with fixed music. Damn it, I knew this would happen! This is Dance and Karaoke, and it does what it says on the tin. It's a dance game with karaoke at the bottom. This is one of those games that I mentioned at the end of my hour-long NES DDR video, and I did so because there just isn't much info about it. I don't know who made it or where it came from. All I know is that it has music that sounds a lot like those multi-cart menus like the Arcade Action 2. The main problem is that the songs are excruciatingly long to make way for the karaoke portion, which repeats the song multiple times, both in English and Chinese. I'm guessing that this was meant for some educational Famiclone computer. It's just so slow, repetitive, and boring. Unlike its contemporaries, which had extremely tight timing, you can hit the notes like a whole second early and still get points for them here. It's insane. I figure that this is a standard karaoke program that they've tacked a dance game onto, which is why it ends up feeling like such an afterthought. If you want DDR on NES, there are several better options, which I'm more than glad to tell you about. S-Move, or Smoove as I like to call it. This is a hack of Battle City, and not even a particularly well disguised one. It has this fancy title screen, but once you hit start, it takes you to a separate title screen where they've replaced the title with Select Game. Classy. I know Battle City is an extremely popular game with a lot of people who grew up with it, but I've just never really been interested in it myself. It's fine. You're a tank, or just a guy in this case, and you have to protect your tower from enemy tanks, or alien construction workers in this case. I think it's mostly the tank aesthetic that's always turned me away from this game. I'm just not particularly into war-themed games. Unfortunately though, I don't think Smoove is doing anything to win me over here. This is probably a game where I would have had to have been forced to play it in order to gain an appreciation for it as a child, but my Superjoy had 75 other games to pick from, so I'll probably never have the respect for this game that it deserves. But if Smoove is anything to go by, I'm not the only one who wasn't really into the game's creative vision. Pokemon is a hack of nuts and milk, a game whose existence I'm nostalgic for, but I never got particularly far in. I think it's one of those things where I just have to get used to its early NES game jank, because I've always found this game frustrating for reasons that are out of my control. It just manages to feel so touchy and stiff at the same time. It's a skill issue, I know. Obviously, being a Pokemon themed hack, all of the characters have been replaced with Pikachu. I mean, as far as most older adults are concerned, that's all Pokemon is anyway. This was made by Funtime, the same group behind those Y2K multi-carts, and the menu on the Power Player Superjoy 3 console that I grew up with. Said multi-cart title screen is a pretty good indicator of which stolen properties they usually used in their hacks. I'm only slightly ashamed to say that this is the furthest I've ever gotten into this game. I think I found a new appreciation for this game, but I still suck at it. Thanks, Funtime. Cute Bear? Check. Hack of Nice Code's Matt Xmas? Also check. All this game really boils down to is running back and forth, catching the falling gifts in your bowl, and avoiding the lightning bolts and fucking grenades. This bear is kind of a dick. You can pick up a piece of candy to go faster, or drink away your sorrows to go slower. It really doesn't get any more complicated than this. I guess this is the type of game that you could play for hours, but it doesn't really have a difficulty increase, so I'm not sure why you would want to. I think the grating Nice Code music is more of a deterrent than the gameplay itself though. It's probably one of their more hateful tracks. I think the most remarkable thing to me is just how many variants Nice Code squeezed out of this game. Project Plug and Play has 15 of them. 4 different variants of Mad Xmas, 2 mummy ones, 2 Care Bear ones, one with a crocodile, and another Santa themed one with a few different variants. Wai Jing even got in on the party at one point, and they thankfully had the sense to replace the music. Wyson is a genericized hack of Wisdom Boy by Gamtech. People are always bewildered by the fact that I know what a Wyson is. I'll tell anyone who listens. Every level consists of these 8 shapes that are arranged in different configurations, and you need to use the remaining pieces to fill in the square. This is the type of game that I could play for hours, because while I may be stupid, I'm even more stubborn. I also don't remember it sucking this much, and it's because the VT369 enhanced version that was randomly selected for me fucking sucks. It strips the game of most of its sound effects and removes the ability to press start to put the pieces back. You can only move one tick at a time while holding the piece, so you have to hammer on the D-pad all the way to the right of the screen if you want to put a piece back. Why are so many VT369 games allergic to the start button? The script felt kind of unfinished, so I thought I'd add to it. This was one of my favorites on my childhood Dream Gear, and there are 54 entire levels. I actually quite like this game. The 369 version is just the worst one. It's like 3 AM by the way. Math Sort is a slide puzzle, presumably having originated from some sort of educational computer based on the Windows theme border. It was 2 AM while I was recording this footage, so you can see that I'm struggling to make any significant progress after the first 3 numbers. But the goal here is obviously to get all of the numbers in order. I don't get why this even needs a mouse cursor. I think this would work better if you just had to press the D-pad in the direction that you intended to slide. It's just this. No music, no sound effects, just sliding numbers around. So how's your day going? Wow, what a title screen! It almost makes you forgive the horrible music! Danger Birds reminds me a lot of that one minigame in New Super Mario Bros. Where you have to draw the lines between the paths to make sure that the PNG of Mario wouldn't get eaten. Except here, you have to control these two sets of platforms on the top and bottom of the screen to make sure that these mushroom dudes don't drown to death. I kinda hate that you have to switch between these two sets by pressing up and down. I found it pretty hard to focus on more than one part of the screen at a time, and sometimes I needed to react faster than I could with that extra input. I feel like one of the sets could have been controlled with A and B or something. I even came back to it later to see if it was just my 2 AM brain slowing down my reaction time, and I had the same issue. This game just isn't executed very well, and it's not very fun. Mega Trek 3 is a hack of Cycross, apparently. Can't say I've ever heard of it. And as someone who's never played the original game, I am extremely confused. I can gather that I want to push my opponents into obstacles or shoot them from behind, and that I also don't want to touch anything with the nose of my ship. And after looking up some footage, I can say that this game makes infinitely more sense from the original angled perspective. I guess they did a pretty good job of recontextualizing it though, because I never would have guessed that it had any perspective. The main issue with huge graphical overhauls like this is that, when designing a game, you're more likely to make graphics that clearly indicate how objects are supposed to behave. When you're cobbling shit together, you aren't keeping that in mind. So like with some of the previous games, it's hard to distinguish obstacles from collectibles. It just doesn't work. Alright, so this one is a bit weird. It's called Archer, and despite that, this game consists of you directly throwing arrows at birds with your bare hands. I'm pretty sure that isn't how that works. Maybe this is about the TV series? I don't know, I haven't seen it. As I'm sure you can guess by this point, this is a clone of a pre-existing game, sort of. This is a reskin of the official Intellivision licensed Famiclone port of Buzz Bombers. This happened extremely often with these nice code ports, which they made for Atari and Intellivision. These plug-and-plays are actually the origin of a significant amount of the junk that you'll find on these devices. They've removed most of the interesting mechanics from the original version though, such as the honeycomb and the hummingbirds. So we're just left with this pissed off dude chucking arrows directly at birds. And I think this is the first time I've ever actually beaten an Ice Code game, so that's fun. Action Ball is a game about getting rid of your balls. You play as a rabbit and have to go up against other animals, and the name of the game is getting all the balls from your side of the court to theirs. But your opponent has the same goal, and being a computer, it's way better at getting rid of its balls than I am. I thought a turbo controller might be the way to go, but this ended up being a terrible strategy, because it meant that the opponent could then stun lock me in place as it rapidly threw all of my balls back at me. And once all the balls are on one side of the court, the side without any remaining balls wins. I think you can angle your shot by holding the D-pad before throwing, but this game is so hectic that if you spend any time on any single ball, you're more likely to end up with a bunch more balls that you don't want. I don't need a video game to remind me about the perils of getting rid of balls. Puzzle Quest is a game in which you need to guide the penguin to the snowy house and the Moogle out of this labyrinthine hell. And how do we do that, you ask? With another damn slide puzzle, of course. It has the same stupid cursor mechanic as the previous slide puzzle I took a look at, but at least this one snaps to the squares and I don't have to slowly drag the cursor around. If the two characters cross paths, they start making out, jorking it. I don't like whatever's happening here. I think we've already established that I suck at slide puzzles, but this one is especially annoying because you have to wait for the characters to get off the squares before you're able to move them. By complete dumb luck, I somehow managed to get to the second level, and then I got stuck, and then I got sent back to the first level after running out of time. Alright, I'm done here. Ice Cap is sort of a play on Breakout, I guess? You play as a mermaid and shoot bubbles up at the blocks at the surface. The point is to get the debris to knock out the fish, and you clear the stage by getting rid of all of the fish. If you try to cut out the middleman and hit the fish directly with your bubbles, it'll respawn one that you've cleared as a penalty. As you progress through the levels, the fish patterns get tougher, even occasionally firing projectiles. This goes on until you've drained your life meter, at which point the universe explodes and the game ends. This seems oddly well designed for an Ice Code game, and that's because it's a pretty direct clone of Imagic's No Escape for the Atari 2600. This was never a licensed release as far as I know, but oddly enough, there are a handful of remakes of Imagic and Activision games like this in Ice Code's library. I wonder if these were intended for a plug-and-play that never got produced or something. There is a Technosource plug-and-play with Activision games, but that isn't a Famiclone, and Technosource had already shit-canned Ice Code at that point as far as I can tell. This is Deer Stalking. Or Deer's Talking, whichever you prefer. I guess games about killing animals were a fairly popular genre around this time. You aim around, wait for a deer to start eating, and hope that it doesn't start running away before you can get the cursor in position. I'm not sure if you're supposed to be able to shoot the deer in the background, but I only had success with the foreground deer. The deer fold without much fanfare, but the deer heads mogging you in the pause menu serve as an eternal reminder that you haven't gotten the last laugh. I've never been more intimidated by deer in my life. 5. Mogging deer and the game's over. I'm sleeping with one eye open tonight. Rush Hour is an uglified hack of Taito Chase HQ, another game which I've never heard of until playing this hack. It's basically a game where you play as a cop car and catch criminals by beating the shit out of their car with your car, which you can upgrade to do this more effectively. This hack removes most of the stuff that makes this game aesthetically interesting in order to make it language agnostic, but it doesn't remove the Arkanoid controller support, immediately making this the most fun I've ever had with a driving game on the NES. I doubt that you could even plug an Arkanoid controller into any of the consoles that this game came on, but it works out for me. They've effectively stripped this game of its personality, but it still kinda rocks. This is The Archer. Not to be confused with our friend Archer, this is The Archer. This one actually practices real archery. The goal of this game is to shoot up at these goblin statues that are dropping spike balls at you. Maybe they aren't statues, but they aren't moving, so I'm gonna assume that they're statues. Once they both change color, you're able to proceed to the second level. The second level adds stuff that drips from the ceiling and demons that fly by and don't do much else. The droplets, which I'm assuming are lava, have a giant hitbox that lasts longer than their sprites appear on screen, so you'll want to stay away from where they've landed. The third level also makes the goblins take 1,000,000 hits, whereas you're only able to take 1 hit before you lose a life, so you'll probably just want to steer clear of this game in general. Roadstar is a game where you launch a car off of a ramp onto a broken piece of road. Launching a car is quite simple. You hold A to charge up your shot, and release it to send the car flying. The gauge fills up extremely fast, so you have to be really careful when aiming for close pieces of road. But not too careful, or else the car slowly crawls up the ramp. This isn't a super engaging game, and I hate that the piece of road moves between every attempt, but the speed at which you can fire off attempts got me addicted really fast. The VT03 version charged up much slower, which I guess makes it a little bit better, but it's not as fun when you can't rapid fire attempts. There's also a Cars licensed version that removes the explosion sound effect, despite that basically being the plot of the movie that this is a tie-in for as far as I'm concerned. I don't know, I've never watched it. Maybe I'll already have my driver's license by the time I'm posting this, and if that's the case, you can rest assured that this is exactly what I'm doing with my day. This is Strong Pill, or Strong Pijik as multi-cart menus like to call it. And I mean, that's fair, you did that to yourself here. This is a game where you play as some weird bug plankton thing and have to push radishes around to reach this orb, which I assume is the titular Strong Pill. It must be some really good shit for someone to be willing to navigate this mess to get it. The main problem here is that there doesn't really seem to be any rhyme or reason as to which direction these obstacles can be pushed in. Some can only be pushed sideways or vertically, and there's no visual indication for this. I think the footage that I captured is the furthest that I've ever seen anyone get in this game, and I have no idea how to proceed. Some of the alternate versions have sound effects or music during gameplay, but never both. Pick your poison, I guess? I think I'm gonna need some strong pills when I'm done with these games. Bounce Wave is a hack of Clue Clue Land that replaces bubbles with a car. I think this is one of the few examples of a game that's already so abstract and nonsensical that there was nothing that any hacker could do to out-weird Nintendo here. If the game didn't have a bunch of garbage data and hadn't forgotten to remove references to Clue Clue Land from everywhere except the title screen, this honestly wouldn't be any less weird than the real thing. It has the same weird 2 title screen setup as the other early Cube Tech hacks for Macro Winners consoles that we looked at. I wonder what the deal with that is. In case you've never clued before, you spin around these poles to swing yourself around the stage and reveal tiles to make up an image, avoiding the holes and shouting at your enemies so that you can stun and flatten them to death. It's one of those games that I didn't really get as a stupid kid, but it's actually a pretty fun game. The movement just feels so satisfying. And these early Famicom games just have such a distinctive charm to them that I'll always associate with my early childhood. For many generations, these easily stealable games were foundational to our love of video games.